Girl. Finn's like, seriously? Oh, I'm sure. So sad. Poor Finn.
Good morning, ladies. Welcome back to Navigating Motherhood, Thursday morning, 9:36 a.m.
Happy Thursday.
We have exciting things going on outside, big cranes.
Yeah. Oh,
was
do you
fun
want to
for the
tell them about
kids.
the emergency alert?
Yes, we were told that at around 10:16 this morning, we're going to get like an emergency test alert on our phone.
For
even
earthquakes.
If it's for an earthquake. So nobody panic. But if we start hearing emergency sounds, what do you do? I don't remember what you do. You take your phone out, you click turn off, stop.
I think it just takes
We got
like
it.
a couple of seconds and it's over.
But I thought it's like those loud, like scary,
It
like,
is.
startling, like, woo!
It is, for
Okay.
sure.
So just so you guys know, 10:16, your phones will probably be ringing.
Yeah. Okay, so we
Tell
have...
them you're busy. You're in Navmo this morning.
Okay, so Fall Fest. We have Fall Fest coming up very, very soon.
October 31st.
Yes, this is why we will be off next week to prepare for Fall Fest because it is such a big deal here. There's rides, there's games, there's an In-N-Out truck. It is the best time. So if you're looking for something to do on Halloween with your family and friends, come over to Fall Fest. There's tons of candy. And it starts at 6 o'clock and goes until 9 o'clock. It's a super fun time. It's fun to see all the costumes.
And it's free.
Get your family
free.
fed. Yes, it's free. It's just a fun time.
Yeah. And then our next announcement, we covered this last week too, we announced it, was that our Christmas coffee is coming up December 1st and 2nd. So it's 2 mornings that you can choose from, whichever works best for you. But it's such an intimate little morning. I mean, it's a big, intimate morning, but the tables are decorated so beautifully. You can get tickets. They start to go on sale
Saturday,
the 21st at 8 a.m.
This Saturday.
So go to compasswomen.org to register. You can buy some tickets, or I'm sure that your table leaders might be in the works with getting tables and stuff. So be sure to talk to them if you guys are interested, because it's a really fun morning.
For sure.
Yeah. And there is coffee.
Yeah,
and there's
there
food.
is coffee. There's lots of coffee. Yeah.
And Christmas.
Yes, and Christmas. It's a sweet event. Okay, thank you to Tables 5 and 6 for bringing breakfast. It looks like a really good spread back there, so awesome job, guys. We're off next week for our first table fellowships.
Yay!
Fun.
Yeah.
And then when we get back, Tables 1 and 2, you guys are going to be up for breakfast.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, we're going to call Marie up. She is going to pray for us this morning. She is one of our mentor moms. She's been married to Don for 34 years. They have 2 daughters, and they're both married, and she has 3 granddaughters, which I see you bring them here.
Yeah, she's with them all the time. It's the cutest thing.
Awesome, Grandma. Are you Grandma, or are you Mimi? Oh, that's sweet. She loves that they get together for family dinners each week and to take her grandgirls to Knott's fairly often. Are you guys annual pass holders? Is that how that? That's a great deal.
A lot less expensive than Disneyland.
Yeah.
Like $120.
Well, and they ride, they have that kid area that is like more that, is that what it's called? Snoopyland.
So Camp Snoopy.
Camp
Yeah,
Snoopy.
Camp Snoopy. That's it.
I had Snoopy.
All right, Marie, thank you.
Okay. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Thank you, Father, for this morning. I just ask you to be with Sharon as she brings us the wisdom of your word. Help us to have good discussions that honor you. And I ask you to bless this food as we nourish our bodies, and just bless the people who brought the food for us. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Do you want to announce tables?
Thank you. Tables 1 and 2. You guys are first. Winner.
Winner. Breakfast. Chicken time.
We're good. I'm done, everybody.
We'll be here all week, folks.
I'm getting sweaty up there now.
Okay, tables 3 and 4. 3 and 4. You guys can go back and get your food.
Tables 5 and 6. Tables 5 and 6.
Okay, ladies, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today. It's always a pleasure when she comes back to join us in Navigating Motherhood. Sharon Canavo has been gratefully married to her husband, Mario, for 37 years. They have 3 grown children and married children, and they just had their first grandbaby in July. In 1994, Mario and Sharon founded the first homeschool hybrid, Cornerstone Community School, here in South Orange County. And the school specialized in working with Christian parents to train the hearts of their children in moral maturity. And Sharon wrote the Training Hearts for Jesus biblical parenting curriculum. And she and Mario founded Training Hearts for Jesus biblical parenting ministry, where they do a 14-week class each week. It's a class each week, and it's for 14 weeks. But if you guys haven't heard of it, you should ask your leaders, because it is such an amazing program for parents to understand your children, understand how to parent your children, and it is such a blessing. And Sharon is just so well versed in parenting and how to handle your children, and we are very excited to have her today to talk about self-control. So please welcome Sharon to the stage.
Awesome. Thank you. I am always so thrilled to be here at Navigating Motherhood, my favorite group. Absolutely. Oh, and I did not bring my glasses up. I looked down at my notes and I'm like, where are they? Oh, they're on my shirt. I'm 65 years old. All right. Thank you. All right. Well, the reason, as she was saying, the reason we founded Cornerstone was we wanted to make sure that we were putting our kids into classrooms that were going to be focusing on the same things that we felt were so important, and that was the biblical character and moral skills. And most schools, of course, are focusing on academics. We did focus on academics, but that was secondary. We focused first on the biblical skills that God deems so important. And we believed that as God considers those as important as he does, that it is obviously going to benefit the lives of our children, right? And as moms, that's what we wanted. We wanted our kids to have the best chance in life. So we knew that if we were focusing on those skills, our kids were going to be learning things like respect and consideration for others, which means they had to be able to look outside themselves. They were going to be learning how to be obedient. They were going to learn how to focus well. These are all skills that can be taught. And, of course, they were going to learn self-control. And really, self-control should be at the top of that list. Because without self-control, how do you learn to be obedient? How do you learn to consider others better than yourself? Because we're driven to serve ourselves first. We really are. We have to learn to be self-sacrificing. And you have to have self-control to focus. So all of those things fall underneath that important top biblical skill called self-control. So this sounds incredibly different from what we're hearing in the world today. I don't know if you all are noticing that, but if you get on the internet or you get on Instagram, there is a whole different philosophy that is being discussed out there. And modern psychology, they encourage parents not to train kids in these skills because they believe that they are not developmentally ready for that. So parents are holding back from teaching these skills that used to be taught to babies, right? Beginning at that age. And they are also being convinced that if they do start to train, they're putting too much pressure on the children. It's kind of a fear factor. And this is a lie, ladies. It is absolutely a lie. I guess there could be people who are putting too much pressure on their kids, But just because you're training self-control does not mean that you're putting too much pressure on your kids. So we have to be careful about what we're learning out there and who we're learning it from. The fact that kids are no longer learning these skills is overarching, leaving kids handicapped in these very important moral skills that are going to help them in life. And because of that, and parents are confused about then when do you start, right? It seems like they're always developmentally unable, because they are until you train it. And so when do you start? And how do you get a handle on it from that point on? People are at a loss with that. So the reason these are considered moral skills is because the Bible instructs us to practice these skills. And the moral skills are the things that have to do with the inner man. So they have to do with the mind, they have to do with the heart, and they have to do with the soul. And they are actually the things that will drive behavior. So they drive behavior in us, and they drive behavior in our kids. All skills, whether they're non-moral or whether they're moral, can be taught. That's what it means when they say developmental. Developmental just means that it will develop, but it has to be trained. So how many of you have taught your kids sign language? You can do that even prior to age 1, can't you? And then every time your child uses sign language, as opposed to screaming or yelling, or crying, they are practicing self-control. So you don't even realize that, because that's a socially acceptable skill to teach. Everybody promotes that, but that is literally teaching your children self-control. We had a little guy at Cornerstone, so cute. He was the middle child. He had 3 siblings. And his mom definitely believed that training her kids in these areas was going to be a benefit for them. So Will was 5 years old. He was in kindergarten at the time. And one Monday, we all came into school. We were housed in a church. They were the ones that rented us space for our school. And we were overwhelmed with lacquer, fumes. And we, those of us teachers, administration, we were looking at each other like, oh, this is not good. And so we're running through the building, we're opening windows, turning on fans, getting it aired out. And we got it pretty well aired out, finally let the kids into the classroom, and they sat down. I went into my office, started working. All of a sudden, about an hour later, the kindergarten teacher comes flying through my office door. Sharon, little Will is in the church office right now. We called the paramedics, and they are just arriving. He's not doing well. He's having a hard time breathing. And I jump out of my chair. I fly down the stairs, run into the office, and there's the paramedic on his knees, looking at little Will, sitting in this chair, and the paramedic is trying to get an oxygen mask on him. And I can see Will's lips, and they are blue. So he is clearly not getting enough oxygen. So I'm standing there, and the paramedic begins to ask Will questions. And he looks at Will, and Will, here he is with this mask on him, sitting very still. And the paramedic says, Will, he says, can you tell me what happened? And I'm thinking, he's got an oxygen mask on him, his lips are blue, and you're asking him to explain something? He's 5 years old. And little Will takes his oxygen mask off very calmly, and he says, well, when I got to school, about an hour in, I started having difficulty breathing. And he puts his oxygen mask back on. He's looking straight at the paramedic, because he's been taught to have eye contact with authorities, because that's the respectful thing to do. So he puts his mask back on his face. The paramedic turns, he looks like halfway looks at me, I can see the smile on his face, and he's fighting, trying not to, be laughing in the middle of Will's difficulty. And he says to Will, he says, okay, Will, he said, thank you. He said, can you tell me when you first started having difficulty breathing? And again, the mask very calmly comes off his face, eye contact with the paramedic, and he says, yes, sir. He said, I noticed it about an hour after I got here, and it just kept getting worse. And he put the oxygen mask back on. I'm sorry I'm doing the little kid voice, but that's what's playing inside my head. I have this perfect memory of little Will sitting there. So the mask is back on. The paramedic is on his knee. Now he does a full turn around to me, and he's going, where did this kid come from? This is amazing, And the whole time, Will is just being so considerate to the paramedic and so obedient, doing everything he's supposed to do. And the paramedic gets him onto the stretcher. There's a couple of them there, and they're rolling him out to the ambulance, and I'm following right behind. They stick little Will on this great big huge stretcher into the ambulance, and I'm waving, Will, your mama will see you at the hospital. And he's waving back at me, and the doors close, and the paramedic turns around and he looks at me and he goes, I have been doing this for a lot of years, and he said, I have not worked on adults who have handled a situation like this as well as he has. He said, he is amazing. And I thanked him. I said, thank you so much for helping, and off they went to the hospital. Well, Will got to the hospital. He got all the care that he needed. In fact, the nurses and the doctors, we heard later, were so happy with Will that he got extra care. He had a wonderful time in the hospital with the doctors and the nurses. And the next day, Will came back to church, or back to school, to the church. The church had put the lacquer shelves outside. Thank you very much for doing that. And the only significant change that happened in the school was we now had an EpiPen in the school office. So the fact of the matter is, when I think back at that, that was not only Will. We had a whole school of kids that had learned all of those same skills. And of course, they were at different levels. Not everybody would have fared as well as Will did, but they were all working towards that. And it was really amazing. We need to understand, number one, on your outline, that self-control is a gift that keeps on giving. So we're going to define self-control. We want to make sure we're all on the same page. We know what we're talking about. And as I give you this definition, I want you to think about Will and that story I just shared with you. Okay, here's the definition. Self-control is the ability to control oneself, in particular, one's emotions and desires, or the expression of them in one's behavior, especially in difficult situations. Will could have written that definition, right? Because this is a super unpopular topic today. You can't find it, really, on the internet, because that's what I did. I went searching. I wanted to see, what are they saying about self-control today? I know what I believe, and I base what I believe on the Bible. But what is the world saying? We have become so inundated with psychology's opinions on things that I wanted to see, okay, what's going on? And sadly, as I searched and searched, the only thing I could find on self-control was the point where somebody had gotten so angry, right? Almost violent anger. Then they were trying to work with that person on self-control. And I thought, wow, if that's where we've come, that we're not even going to begin talking about self-control until a person is at that point, that they've practiced anger so much of their lives that now they are out of control with their anger, that is really sad. I kept digging. I kept thinking there's got to be something more on self-control. I came across a report. It was called I got to say it right. It's spelled differently than how it sounds. It's from New Zealand, and they call it the Dunedin Report. It's a multidisciplinary health and development study, and it's a big one. It was based in New Zealand, as I said, and it followed the lives of 1,037 people who were born between April 1st, 1972, and March 31st of 1973, so within 1 year. So they were all the same age within 1 year. These participants began at age 3, and they were evaluated 13 times throughout their lives. The last time they were evaluated was when they were 45 years old. And they will be evaluating them again as they move into their 50s. So it did not start as a study on self-control. It was just an overarching, just behavioral and developmental study. They weren't looking for one thing in particular. But as the data was gathered, as they got into their adult life, into their 30s, they realized what they were looking at was an absolutely perfect picture of those that had self-control and the consequences versus those who lacked self-control and the consequences. So without going into all the details of that report, because I read quite a bit on that, they found that those that were lacking in self-control, with even in regard to IQ, social class, and gender, they were overwhelmingly typical in these areas. They all had financial difficulties. They all had higher crime convictions. They all had lower life and parenting skills. Now we're talking about it going into a second generation, right? They all had high divorce rates. And sadly, but predictably, they all had high suicide rates. Isn't that amazing? I mean, we're talking about hundreds of people here that have been walked through life, and this is what they found: self-control versus a lack of self-control. And yet today, we are barely even talking about self-control. That's sad, right? This is an important issue. So based on these overwhelming findings, we need to understand, number 2 on our outline, lacking self-control draws judgment and consequence. So let me show you how. If we think about what's behind all those statistics, consider this. Those lacking in self-control overwhelmingly, as we said, experience financial consequences for their bad choices. They had a hard time securing home loans and business loans. So they were having difficulty even getting established in their adult lives. They were considered credit risks. There were authorities over these people, over these choices that were being made, over the decisions that were being made on these people. There were authorities who had to make judgments on those people to figure out whether or not they were going to lend them money, right? And they had to do it in view of the fact that they had to protect the financial industry. Right? If they're out there giving money to anybody that wants it, what happens to the financial industry? It collapses. And so there are authorities who have to make judgments. So there were financial advisors, there were bankers, and they all earned their paycheck making these kinds of judgments. Then those who ended up suffering consequences because they were in trouble with the law, right? They were making bad choices. They were unable to be obedient to the laws out there. They didn't have the self-control to do that. There were authorities making judgments at the back end of those statistics as well. So there were police, there were jailers, there were judges, right? All these people trained to make judgments on these people. And their reason for making judgments is what? To keep our society safe, right? Those lacking in self-control who were void of life skills and parenting skills, there were authorities at the back end of those statistics. They were teachers, school administrators, psychologists, child protective services, all these different industries that are watching over children are making these judgments and making decisions. These were the authorities. So our culture has grown to disdain the idea of being under authority or the idea of judgment, haven't we? We get very up in arms if we think we're being judged or if somebody is being judgmental. And so we've become, it's kind of a trigger word. We get very upset about that. People protest it, right? They're politicking against all of the judgment or the authorities. Authorities are being they're having a harder and harder time doing their jobs, aren't they? So that what they're doing, those who are politicking, those who are protesting, is they're trying to get rid of the authorities. They're trying to get rid of the idea of judging. But, ladies, we have to understand that is just never going to happen. It can't. It cannot happen. And you wouldn't want it to happen. Because if it happened, you and your children would be having to deal with evil in this world that is unrestrained, right? The only reason we have any protection in this world is because we have authorities in charge who are making decisions and making judgments. So if you could remove those, we would be in big trouble. So granted, authorities aren't perfect. We all know that, right? They're not always making right decisions. Judgments are not always right. But that doesn't negate the overarching idea that we value our authorities in our culture. We value them, and we are thankful for the judgments that they have to put themselves on the line and make. So there are records that go clear back to the beginning of time of judicial systems. This is something that has been going on since the creation of the world, really. And even back to the most ancient documents, you're going to find that have always been authorities. There have always been judgment made. And there's always been consequences that people have suffered. So why is it even that we have an instinct, right? We judge every single day, whether we like to think we do or not. We judge what clothes we're going to wear. We judge how we want our children to behave. We judge whether a person is going to pull in front of us on the freeway, right? We are making judgments every single day. We judge whether something was right or wrong. We judge whether it was good or evil. Right? It's instinctive in us. We know it. So the system of judgment is not without a designer. There is a designer, and this is why it has always been in the world. In fact, he is often called the just God. He is perfectly just. He judges righteously, perfectly, without prejudice, right? He does it in perfect wisdom. His judgments are perfect. And we can trust his judgments. We can trust him. And God is motivated by love. So his judgments are based on the fact that he cares for you. And so when we go back and we look at the consequences and everything that happens, the judgment, the authorities, and we see that the overarching effect is for safety and for our well-being, we start to understand that God has established this. Romans 13, 1 and 2 even tells us, let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Isn't that amazing? Therefore, whoever resists the authorities resists what God has appointed, and those who resist will incur judgment. God established that. That's his word. So let's take a closer look at these non-negotiable elements. Letter A, there will always be an authority making judgments. Always. We can try to live in a society that strips the value of teaching self-control to our children, which we are, but we cannot change the truth that for those who do not practice self-control, the consequences will make a difference in either a well-lived life or a devastated life. We need to understand that humanity needs, to be under authority, and your child needs to be under authority. That's where they begin to learn what good authority is. And the better you are at being a loving authority to your children, and the better you are at judging their behaviors for the sake of growing them to moral maturity. That's what we want for our kids, right? The greater chance they will have at life, just like little Will, right? Things went well for him that day, even though he was in the midst of a crisis. Our second non-negotiable element is every action equals consequence. Every action equals consequence. And we may not realize that, we may not see it, but it's a fact. Good action equals good consequence. Bad action equals bad consequence. So those who fell into the category of lacking self-control, we see that they suffered very serious consequences, didn't they? Their life was not going well for them. Those who were strong in self-control benefited from very great consequences that blessed their lives and their families' lives. Now, as parents, we can go into the culture and convince ourselves that our children are eventually going to straighten out because that's what they're trying to get us to believe. We've got a 40-year study, right, that's telling us that doesn't happen. Those without self-control live a life without self-control. Or we can make the choice to be purposeful in our parenting and recognize how vital it is to train our children in self-control. If dad and mom are willing to apply these two non-negotiables in your home by providing a right example of authority and by making right judgments in the home and apply thoughtful and appropriate consequences, your child will be one of the few, because of the culture we're living in, your child will be one of the few fortunate individuals who are able to live a good life in this world coming up, right? It will be successful and it will be far happier. Now, I'm not saying they're not going to have issues and problems and crises, but they are going to know how to walk through it well. So for those of you who want to start doing this with your children, number 3 on your outline, self-control must be effectively trained, okay? We got to put aside all of the lies that we're being told, and we have to understand that we can be purposeful. We can help our children to learn these things. So when we embrace the truth of the two non-negotiables, we allow those non-negotiables to be our motivation to train our children. So how do we begin in that, right? Let's get practical here. Well, there is a framework that I want to share with you, and that framework begins with biblical love. And the reason I say biblical love is because biblical love is the only love that is sacrificial, right? It encourages us to take our eyes off ourselves and do the hard things for others. So when we tackle parenting that is not convenient for us, but it's highly beneficial for our children, we are sacrificially serving and training and loving our children. On the other hand, when our children are treated as the center of the universe, then we can't be surprised when they selfishly act out against other people. If they're the center of the world, then everyone else is just simply there to serve them, right? When our children understand that they are created in love by God, who has a plan for their lives, and they understand that under his authority, because he is their maker, right? Then do not be surprised when their desire to choose the right thing is heightened. It will be, because our kids are spiritually responsive. I see it all the time. It blows my mind how spiritually responsive they are. That's why Jesus said, "Come like a little child." Because Jesus knows that they're so tender, they're so sweet, and they are so spiritually responsive. And when our children are treated like a valued member of the family rather than the center of the family, and are expected to be an equal benefit to the family, that's unheard of today, but that's the way we should be living, teaching our children that we all are members of one family to benefit one another. Then our children have a purpose in life. And they can be more than the problem in the home. They can be the solution to the problem in the home. So think about little Will and his respect and self-control in such a difficult situation. It makes sense when you realize that he was being encouraged and trained in these moral skills. He was getting it both at home and at school. And when Will's mom needed to correct him, there were a couple of things she would ask him. She would ask him, were you loving God? And were you loving your neighbor? And as soon as she asks those questions, what happens? She doesn't have to judge Will. He's judging himself, which is in us. God has given that in our conscience. We talked about that. We have an instinct. We know how to judge. And when you present those questions to your children, they're judging. Was I loving God? Was I loving my neighbor? And at that point, that is the beginning of growing self-control in that child. The next level of that framework includes 5 targets of respect. So the first target is God. We want to teach and train our children to respect God, to love God, and to understand that he is their maker, which makes him their authority, right? The one who makes something is in charge of that, right? So God is our child's authority. The second one is the elderly, and I get to fall in that now. So gray hair and grandma. I'm grandma now, love that. And we need to teach our kids to respect elderly. So don't be running around on the church patio or at school when there are elderly around, right? Take them into consideration. Give up your seat to grandma, right? Look grandma in the eyes. Make sure she feels loved, right? All those kinds of things you can do for the elderly. Open the door for an elderly person. All those sweet little acts that you can help your kids to do to show respect for grandma. And then authority is the third one, right? So whose authority? Mom and dad, you are, without apology. That's an ordained position that God has given you in your home. You are the authority over your children, and that's a great thing. You get to teach him things that nobody else will be teaching him. And other authorities include teachers, pastors, paramedics, peace officers. Those are all people who can help to train and teach your children. And you need to teach your children to respect them, right? The next one is peers. So that's anybody within their age group, right? Or, I mean, it can be, unless they're an authority. You know, if it's a 16-year-old taking care of a 5-year-old, that 16-year-old for that moment is his authority, right? But the peers are the ones he hangs with, his friends, his brothers, his sisters, and he needs to learn how to consider his peers better than himself, right? And to respect them. And the last one, which seems out of place, doesn't it, is property. But this comes straight from the Bible. The Bible says that we are to respect property. But is it for the sake of property? No. It's for the sake of the owner of the property, right? So when your child walks into a house and they start jumping on the person's couch, right? They're not showing respect for property, which is attached to the owner that worked hard to pay for that sofa, right? And so property falls into that as well. So those are the 5 targets of respect that you can focus on and help your children to understand. If you need more help with that, I've got a blog called Only One Commitment, Biblical Respect. So if you go to traininghearts.org and go to the blog, you will find that article. So having established this, the next question you ask your child is, to whom did you fail to show respect? Once again, you're not sitting there lecturing your child. You're drawing on his conscience, and you're asking him to judge himself. Really good. All right? So whom did you fail to show respect? At this point, don't be surprised. Your child's going to know. If you've been teaching him these 5 levels of respect, he's going to understand that. So this is a judgment question. That's what we want to do, is keep placing these kinds of questions in front of our kids. Again, if he doesn't know the answer, if he honestly doesn't know the answer when you're asking these kinds of questions, then you know that's where you need to begin to train. So then there might be a little bit of training. Less words is always better with our kids, right? Again, consider little Will as he would remove the oxygen mask and respectfully answer with eye contact his authority who was standing there helping him. Very sweet. Right? And Will, in turn, was given compassionate care throughout the entire ordeal because of what he was able to give to others. And it takes daily practice. Will didn't just walk in and for the first time ever start acting that way, right? He had to learn that on a daily basis. Next, when your child has been disobedient or rebellious or selfish in their actions, it's time to give a consequence. We need to be the ones to show them that when there is action, there is consequence. If your child does something really sweet and really good, or they're characterized by doing something, reward them with a nice consequence. Don't do it every time, or they'll start doing it for the reward, and that doesn't help. But anywhere down the road where you see them doing it on a regular basis, don't be afraid to bring a positive consequence into their life. But when they do something wrong, make sure that there is a negative consequence applied, okay? Because they've got to learn before they get out in the world that consequences are non-negotiable. You don't want your children surprised when they get out in the world that they have to go to jail because they just stole something, right? So if you have a hard time figuring out what consequences to give, I have a blog for that. And it's called Discovering Related Consequences. So check that out. So it's not exhaustive, that article. It is not exhaustive, but it's a good place to start, right? So let's look at some practical ways to grow them in self-control. So we need to understand when our children have freedoms that are beyond their range of being able to handle those freedoms, then we've set them up for failure. And I would say this is probably one of the most typical mistakes I see in homes today where the kids kind of have the run of the home. And I would recommend that the home be a parent-run home. And by that, what you're doing is you're setting up boundaries. And that is the way that we begin to really teach them how to be self-controlled. We fill their world with boundaries so that they begin to respect those boundaries around them. So just to go through a few of those boundaries, we're going to go through time boundaries, physical boundaries, and verbal boundaries. And I'm going to start with time boundaries. And I know that as I start saying this, I'm going to lose so many of you because you hate schedules. But I am telling you that when you put a schedule in your home, you end up with freedom. You do. And it is glorious. I would highly recommend that you put time boundaries in your home. So you already know what time they go to bed and what time they get up in the morning. You know what time meal times are. Put that all on a schedule. You know when nap times are. So get everything that is, an absolute, put it on the schedule. And then on the areas that don't have anything, we're going to start to plug in other things to keep your child on that schedule throughout the day. Now, the schedule is not for you to be locked in. I mean, if you need to break that schedule, you break that schedule, because the schedule's for you, not you for the schedule, right? It's there to help you. So if you need to change the schedule or adjust it, you are free to do that. If you want to just say, we're going to the park today and we're not going to be on a schedule, you're free to do that, right? But when you're at home, oh my goodness, I used to love it when I would get home with the groceries and the kids would help me in with the groceries, drop the bags, and all of a sudden, of course, the two boys would be wrestling. And I would just say to them, hey guys, what's on the schedule? And they would run off to the schedule, look at it, and off they'd go to do what was on the schedule. Great. I didn't have to think about it. I didn't have to get mad at them. I mean, it was just glorious. And I'm putting groceries away, and all is well. So let's look at some of the practical ways to do that. All right, so time boundaries, keep the schedule. If you need to read more on that, guess what? I have a blog on that. And it's called 5 Activity Stations for Family Peace. And you will see all kinds of ideas of what you can do in those slots that are not filled. And let's move on to physical boundaries, because I know you'll be able to go to that and get all your information. Physical boundaries, so how to endure sitting in one place, right? That's at the top of the list, because so many of us can't get our kids to sit. So what we do is we practice things like blanket time, right? We throw a blanket out, and if it's an infant, you can start them in infancy, throw a blanket out, and they learn to respect the boundaries of the blanket. And as they grow and they are accustomed to being on that blanket, and you've applied consequences, because as they get a little older, they're going to fight you on that, and they're going to crawl off the blanket, so there has to be consequences to show them, no, we're going to respect the boundary. Pretty soon you've got kids, and I've got video after video of moms sending me this, where they are so thrilled that they put blanket time into effect, because they're sitting there with a book in front of them or the Bible, and they're doing their quiet time, and they're spanning their camera to show me that 3 or 4 kids are on separate blankets playing quietly with their toys. This is not unusual. It can be done. That's blanket time. It can start with playpen time. If you feel uncomfortable putting them on the blanket too soon, you start them with 5 minutes, and then you up it to 10 minutes when they have victory at 5 minutes, and you just keep upping it. And I knew women that would go into meetings, like church meetings, and they would throw their blanket out, and the kids would be on the blanket, and they'd be quietly playing while mom was in the meeting. And the kids knew that was their little area, and they knew how to sit, they knew how to play with the toys and be quiet, right? And this is not, children should be seen and not heard. This is not that. These kids can talk, and they can talk a lot, but they've also learned that there's a time and a place for that. So they can also learn to respect, like I said, sitting peacefully. And in the areas for sitting peacefully, that's in dinner time, right? Meal time. Too often today, kids are taking 2 or 3 bites, and then they have the freedom to just take off and run through the house. And mom and dad are getting up from the table, and they're having to chase after them. They can learn to sit at the table. They can learn to have family time. It's going to take time. It's going to take practice. It's going to take you being the authority and applying consequences when they aren't doing what you've asked them to do. But I promise you it will not take that long, if you're faithful with that, to get them to sit at the table and enjoy family time together and actually eventually have conversations together. During reading time, I actually heard someone say once, she was liberal in the parenting area, and she said, well, if they can't sit while you're reading, just chase after them while you're reading. And I thought, what? That's crazy. Why would we do that? You can sit with your child, and you can either have them cuddled up with you, or you can have them sitting in front of you, and they can learn to sit and be still and focus, right? This is where focus comes in, and you can read to them. Same with watching TV or a video. Make sure it's a good one, and it's not a babysitter. You do it maybe once or twice during the day for a short amount of time, and you do not have a zillion toys around to distract them. You have them sitting and actually watching the educational video that you put on for them, right? And just for a small amount of time. Maybe it's a 15-minute or a 30-minute video, right? If they get older, it can be a little movie. You can get dinner made, because they know how to sit and actually watch the movie while they're coloring, while they're crafting, right? They don't just scribble on the page, throw it off, and then run off. You teach them, no, this is coloring time. We're going to sit here, we're going to color, and you might do it with them for a little while to help them really fall in love with coloring and gluing. And then you can walk away at some point. And again, right? Authority and consequences. This is how we bring them to this place. And then I used to teach my kids about the personal bubble. And of course I had to, because I had 2 boys, like I said, who wrestled. And so I used to tell them, and plus at the school, we had lots of boys. So I would tell the kids, you have to picture that everybody has a bubble around them. And you're not allowed into their bubble unless you've been given permission to be in their bubble. And you have a bubble too. So if somebody is engaging in your bubble and you don't want them in your bubble, you tell them to get out of your bubble. Nicely, but tell them to get out of your bubble, right? And if they won't get out of your bubble, you have permission to come and get help from an authority, right? They will help you. And so that personal bubble became a good picture in the kids' mind, both at home and at school. It was like Michael was what I called my Tigger. So he was in everybody's bubble all the time. And so if I got word that something had happened, it was like, Michael, were you in the bubble? And he had to learn that he could not get into the bubble unless he was invited. Okay, let's do verbal boundaries really quick. Speaking. How many of you are dealing with kids that are too loud? They are screaming, right, at the top of their lungs. You can show of hands. Yes, I had one that talked all the time. Again, Michael. He learned how to be self-controlled with his voice, keeping it at the right decibel, right? Even at the park, it can be too loud sometimes, right? There are kids that are like, whoa. I'm older now, so I don't hear those decibels anymore, but you guys all do. So you can train your kids to keep the decibels down and train them when it's appropriate to talk and when it's appropriate not to talk. On our drive home, Michael would talk, and I would be up front trying to just figure out what happened during the day and how I'm supposed to get home right now. And Michael would be talking, and I finally said, Michael, Did you know not only do we have a personal bubble, but we have a mental bubble? And so the mental bubble was born that day. And I told him, every time you're talking, you're jumping into my mental bubble. And I can't think. And I got to get us home safely, honey. And so I said, from now on, we're going to practice quiet time when you've been talking too much. And so that's what I would do. I would put him on quiet time. And then all of a sudden, one day, we're coming home. He's talking a million miles an hour. And I was just ready to say, Michael, and it hadn't come out of my mouth. And all of a sudden, Michael says, Mama? And I said, what, honey? And he said, I think it's time for quiet time. I was like, he developed a sense of when it was time to be quiet. So these kids can learn this. This is all a matter of self-control. Again, we're training through role playing, right? That's the best way for kids, is as parents, we teach them by role playing through discussions, not too wordy, and usually story time is the best time for them to learn because it's not about them, but they're learning the lesson watching somebody else in the book, right? And then another helpful blog, if you want it, it's called Parenting Choices, Abandon What's Easy, Promoting What's Right. So check that blog out too. That will help you with all of that. So I know we've just barely scratched the surface on all of this. I hope that I've given you enough information that you can at least go home today and get started. Again, if you guys want more than this, we do a parenting class, and 14 weeks sounds really like a lot, but it goes really fast. It is packed full of information every week. I think you will love it. Is there anybody here that's been through our class? Did you love it? Would you do it again? So you guys might enjoy getting in and doing that. And you will get all kinds of information. Things that you missed in here will be filled in. But you know, what do you think of this? I mean, what do you think in terms of self-control? It sound like it's something that is worth spending time on with your children. You know, I would say for Will's mom, she thought it was time. It was definitely worth the time to put on. And then, do you think that things went well for Will, based on what was going on with him when he was a little 5-year-old? Well, let's take a look at Will. Will is a newly married man to a beautiful girl. That he's up there with his mom, right there with her big smile. He is now a captain in the U.S. Army. After graduating from West Point, he earned his Army Ranger tab. I'm reading this because I could never memorize all this. And then served as an officer in the 82nd Airborne. He is currently at Fort Bragg in North Carolina, and he is training to be a part of the Special Forces as a Green Beret. Wow. Will told me that her son has become an extremely hardworking young man and that he is not having any trouble establishing his life right now. His self-control training took him much farther than his mother ever thought that he would go. And I am certain that she is extremely happy that she put the effort and the training in to Will, especially because Will has become a glory to God and an incredible benefit to the people that he serves in this country. So ladies, training self-control is attainable, and regardless of the age of the child, it can start today. You only have to value it enough to implement it. And I pray that each of you will consider doing that today. Have a great time in your discussion. Thank you for having me here today. God bless you.